logical fallacies. And again, we want to make sure that we don't fall into the traps of these logical fallacies. First one would be double standards. Where are the Book of Mormon plays? Well, where are Moses' 10 Commandment tablets? Where are the original writings of Old or New Testament prophets? Evangelical anti-Mormons frequently make charges against Latter-day Saints which would be just as damning if they were made against the Bible or Christianity in general. Ed Decker, for example, claims that the LDS testimony is not based upon reason, conscience, or agreement with the Bible, but upon subjective feelings. Yet Ed must rely on the same feelings to know that God exists, or that Jesus was resurrected, or that the Bible accurately records the events of Christ's life. Some critics use the writings of archaeologists and Bible scholars in an attempt to discredit the Book of Mormon. Many of the conclusions of these scholars, however, would also discredit the Bible. Ad hominem, which means attacking a person, basically name-calling. Mormons are gullible. Daniel Peterson is mean.
Well, now it's true.
Pointing out the human sides of past and present leaders is another example. Critics delight in noting every weakness, mistake, wart, or case of bad breath among any church leader. Human leaders do not prove a human institution. We know that the New Testament apostles weren't perfect. Why would we expect modern-day apostles to be perfect? Prophets are not raised in cultural vacuums. Doctrines are revealed a little at a time, according to man's understanding. Even symbolism and terminology are a means to an end. I think many times, what if the church had been restored somewhere other than America? What if it had been restored in China or in Africa? How different would some of the symbolism that we use in the church be in a different culture? So those are all means to an end. Next will be straw man. A straw man argument is one that's built upon something that either is non-existent or exaggerated. The straw man is easily refuted, giving the impression that a real LDS essential has been refuted. Some critics, for example, construct a straw man by claiming that Mormons look to Joseph Smith for salvation. These critics then quote numerous passages from the Bible demonstrating that Jesus is the author of salvation. To those unfamiliar with LDS beliefs, it appears that Mormon theology has been proven false. Latter-day Saints do not, of course, believe that Joseph is the author of their salvation, so the critics have proved nothing. Another type of straw man is unofficial statements. Leader X said Y, so Y must be official doctrine. The Journal of Discourses is a favorite among critics for supposed LDS doctrine. In the early days, nearly all sermons were given extemporaneously. It was virtually unthinkable in 19th century Mormonism to give a memorized or pre-written sermon. The early saints felt they should preach strictly by the Spirit. This led to some interesting sermons, and as George Q. Cannon noted, sometimes he, and probably other speakers, gave sermons when their, quote, minds seemed to be entirely closed up, end quote. What few words I could stammer forth before the congregation, Cannon recalled after one such episode, were altogether unsatisfactory to my own mind, and I presume to those who heard me. It's little wonder that sometimes in the Journal of Discourses we find things that seem out of place in our current knowledge of the gospel principles. General authorities, like everyone else, have thoughts and opinions of their own. As we read in the Encyclopedia of Mormonism, there are many subjects about which the scriptures are not clear, and about which the church has made no official pronouncement. In such matters, one can find differences of opinion among church members and leaders. Until the truth of these matters is made known by revelation, there is room for different levels of understanding and interpretation of settled issues. We have argument from silence. This logical fallacy claims that if something cannot be demonstrated to be true, then it must be false. A frequent charge of anti-Mormons is that since no New World cities have been found bearing Book of Mormon names, then the Nephites could not have existed. It is entirely possible, of course, that either such evidences have disappeared or that future digs may discover new evidences. We can't claim that something wasn't there because we haven't found it yet. Poisoning the well. This anti-Mormon technique is calculated to prejudice the reader or listener into rejecting LDS arguments out of hand because of the source. Some critics, for example, claim that farm scholars are on the church's payroll, therefore the writings cannot be trusted. Never mind the fact that many contributors to farms do not work for the church, or that those scholars who do work for the church are not told by the church what to write. These critics use this technique so that farms' publications will be rejected out of prejudice rather than examining the arguments. I recall sitting through one anti-Mormon presentation after which a lady in the audience said, "I would never believe anything any Mormon ever told me. They just can't be trusted. Anonymous authority and anecdotes. Not infrequently, some anti-Mormons appeal to authorities who are not named. Archaeologists reject the Book of Mormon, or biblical scholars agree that the concept of the Trinity is clearly taught in the Bible. Another instance of referring to anonymous authorities is found in anti-Mormon statements such as, an LDS state president once told me that he actually believed that the temple ceremonies are satanic. Of course, no names are given. We have begging the question. To beg the question means to assume in advance the results of the proposition supposedly being tested. For example, we hear often that unlike the Book of Mormon, the Bible is the Word of God because it was given by the Spirit to prophets and apostles. Well, that assumes that Mormonism doesn't have any prophets or apostles, that Joseph Smith did not receive it through the Word of God. Many times, Mormonism, not Christian, is used, and basically it's interpreted to mean it's not Christian, the evangelical Protestant form. In order to make such a charge, it must be first assumed that the doctrines, practices, and canon of traditional Christianity correctly embody all the necessary fundamentals of Christianity. False dilemma. When an either-or situation is given and there are actually other options. For example, anti-Mormons often claim that if Christianity is true, then Mormonism is false. Or if the Bible is true, then the Book of Mormon is false. Well, both options can be true. Post hoc, or coincidental correlation. Just because one thing follows the other doesn't mean that the second was caused by the first. For example, a number of critics claim that 2 Nephi 1:14 uses language similar to that of Shakespeare's Hamlet, that this demonstrates that Joseph Smith plagiarized from Shakespeare. What these critics generally don't realize, however, is that when we compare this to other ancient Near Eastern texts, the Book of Mormon actually more closely follows the phraseology of the ancient texts from which it claims to have derived. Then we have real scholarship. Go ahead and move forward a little more. There we go. Critics do use real scholarship. Scriptural studies, for instance. There are non-believers who discount Mormon doctrine based on their interpretation of the Bible. These are often based on scholarly studies. It's important to understand that it is a myth to claim that the Bible speaks for itself. The interpretation of biblical passages varies tremendously among believers and even non-believers. How we interpret the Scriptures often result of many factors, including our religious or worldviews, preconceived notions, and frame of reference, just to name a few. Latter-day Saints are not immune to these factors. Early Mormons interpreted some scriptural passages according to the understanding of their day. We do today. In doctrinal matters, however, we have an advantage. As Ross Barron said in his 2001 fair presentation, Mormonism is not based on the Bible, but rather on what the Bible is based on, which is Revelation. Science. Archaeology and DNA, for example, are legitimate fields of study, real scholarship. Problem is, we have to make sure we're asking the right questions, that we know what we are looking for, and that we would recognize evidence if we found it, and that we correctly understand what constitutes evidence. Give some thoughts on this. For example, the Nephites do not belong to Utah LDS wards. So likewise with the New Testament saints, we tend to think that other people, both in different cultures and different time periods, thought like we do. While the Nephites had the gospel, they did not have the 21st century restored in America gospel. They had truths necessary to gain salvation, but they did not have the same programs and perhaps not even the same structure or complete set of beliefs that we have today. Secondly, science is our friend. Truth is truth. If scientific findings seem to contradict something we accept as Mormon essential, we need to look at that distinctive and see if it really is an essential in the gospel or tradition. If the scientific finding appears to contradict an actual Mormon essential, then perhaps, one, we either do not have all the scientific information, or two, we have a misconception about the LDS element. I believe, for example, that science has conclusively demonstrated that not all Amerindians in North and South America were descendants of Lehi. We talked about that yesterday. Some Latter-day Saints, however, thought that this was a true gospel element, but upon further examination of the Book of Mormon doesn't make such a claim. We need to use both study and faith in understanding gospel truths. President Hinckley once said, as a church we encourage gospel scholarship and the search to understand all truth. Fundamentals to our theology is belief in individual freedom of inquiry, thought, and expression. Constructive discussion is a privilege of every Latter-day Saint. Lastly, we have history. Now, some critics attempt to show that the real LDS history is different than the one we were taught in Sunday school. Such historians claim to be objective, and that they simply let the facts speak for themselves. As Peter Novick has demonstrated, however, there is no true objective history. Now, having said this, we can learn from historical analysis. Things were different again in Brigham's day and Joseph's day and Lehi's day. We can gain a better appreciation because of the historical studies. It's my opinion that LDS Apologetics should be scholarly, fair, solid, and methodical, and bold, yet amicable, and non-dogmatic. We should endeavor to keep our minds open to the point that we seek true answers related to gospel issues, and no traditions, folklore, and not traditions, folklore, or Mormon myths. Now, Kevin Barney will talk about LDS resources.